Hey, we're glad that you're here. We are anticipating that others may join us, but we want to go ahead and get started so we can give Lonnie as much time as he needs. So thank you for being here. We did get notification, as some of you may have, about some new COVID restrictions. We're processing those things. We're working through those, and we'll try to make some decisions over the next several days. But we're glad that you're here. We do encourage you to keep your mask on and maintain social distancing until we can really figure out better where we're at and what's expected of us. Before I pray, let me introduce our speaker tonight. As you probably know, Lonnie Bullock is our consultant, and he works with New Church Specialties. He's been in the pastorate for 28 years, serving in various capacities during that period of time: youth minister, associate pastor, and lead pastor. He's also served as a missions development director for the Northeast Indiana District, overseeing the efforts in that district of refocusing, restarting, and planting new churches. Lonnie joined the staff at New Church Specialties as a senior consultant in 2000, and later in that decade, 2010, he was selected to be the executive director of New Church Specialties. I tell you all of that just to let you know that he's served in various capacities through the years and has a great volume of insight and understanding about the church here in America. He works with a number of judicatory districts, helping them develop strategies for implementing church health movement. He graduated from Olivet University. He and his wife, Karen, live in Mesa, Arizona. They have two daughters, Christy and Casey. And it's my pleasure to be able to introduce to you Lonnie Bullock. Before he comes, let me say a quick prayer. Father God, we thank you for this evening and all that you have in store for us. You have prepared us for this moment, and you have equipped Lonnie for this opportunity. I pray that you would give him words to speak clearly, and I pray that you would give us ears to hear clearly, hearts to understand. Father, we love North Park Church, and we want to see it not only continue, but we want to see it grow and impact not only Meridian, but Lauderdale County, and indeed, through the bases in our area, the entire world as we send people out. So guide us, help us to see what you want us to see, to hear what you want us to hear, and to become what you want us to become. We give you thanks and ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Would you please welcome Lonnie Bullock?
Thank you. Hey, the reality of all that stuff is just that I'm old. That's all it means. One of the things that God did early on was begin to direct my life in some different kinds of ways than I ever imagined it would. And here I am in Meridian, Mississippi. Who would ever thought it? Right? I never dreamt that that's what I would be doing at this stage in my life. Quite honestly, I thought I'd be pastoring the rest of my pastoral career. I love pastoring. I love working with people. Seeing light bulbs come on and lives transformed is the joy. But God had a different path in this last 20 years of my life, and so here I am. I've had the chance now to work with over 7,000 churches in several different countries around the world. Lots of different things. And so here we are to deliver an assessment report for the Meridian, in Meridian at the North Park Church. Now, I want to just thank you for your flexibility. One of the realities and the word of our ministry for this year has been flexibility, right? Man, if you're not flexible this year, you're in trouble. Things have just, constantly in this state of flux and change. For some of you know that I was supposed to be here a couple weeks ago to deliver the report, and on top of everything else, you guys decided to have a hurricane. Just kind of 2020 wasn't enough, right? Let's add another thing to it. But we're grateful that we're able to be here and to be able to share with you your assessment report. It's really important that I start that way because this isn't our report. This is what you all said, so we are just the deliverers of the report. So I want to tell you right at the very beginning, I am the messenger. All right, so if you see something you don't like, something you don't quite, it's not me, it's you. In doing that, I'm just here to deliver, right, the report. and what that looks like. And so I want you to imagine that you've gone through a battery of tests. You know, you've got those labs that you've turned in, and now you're waiting for the result, and now you come back to the doctor for the follow-up visit, right, to hear the results, to say, okay, what does it all mean? All this stuff that we have done, what does it mean? And so today, our hope is that as you listen, you'll be encouraged, perhaps challenged, and maybe even corrected a little bit, so that we can be as healthy as we can be as a church to reach as many people as we can possibly reach for Jesus, because that's why we're here. You all need to understand our heart. The only reason I'm here tonight is because lost and broken people matter to God. And if they matter to God, they should matter to us. And if they matter to us, we should be willing to adjust our lives and do whatever God asks us to do. You know, it's one thing to reach people that look like us, smell like us, and talk like us. It's another thing to reach the lost and broken among us who don't have the same kind of upbringing, the same kind of training, the same kind of exposures that all of us do. God has a plan, right? And he's called you and me to make the manifold wisdom of God known to this generation. And so the only reason we deliver a report, the only reason we encourage churches during the interim to be intentional is so that we can be healthier and more effective at the mission that Jesus has called us to, which is to go and make disciples. That's our job. That's our responsibility. That's the commission that he gave to us, all in the name of the great commandment, which is to love God and love others. So the whole idea is that we are called to love God with all of our heart. We're called to love our neighbors, but we're also called to go and be on mission with Jesus. And so that's our goal, is that you can be more effective at doing this. Several years ago, I was delivering an assessment report in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm from Arizona. People ask me, where's your home? Well, that all depends. My parents, my grandparents are all from Mobile. They relocated to Fort Wayne for a while, and then all of my uncles and everybody else moved back to Mobile. But my dad met my mom, and so he stayed in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So Fort Wayne is kind of where I was born and raised. I spent a lot of my ministry career up in Michigan, and now for the last 16 years, we've been in Arizona. So where am I from? I don't know. I live in Arizona. That's where I live. But I was delivering an assessment report in Scottsdale, which is about, 45 minutes or so from my house. And after the report, we got all done, and I was making my way home, and which is really good. I like being able to work in Arizona because I don't have to go on an airplane, I don't have to stay in a motel, I don't have to rent a car or anything else, just to be able to do that. So I'm on my way home, and I opened my garage door, and as I was pulling my car into the garage, I began to have pains in my chest like I'd never had before. I thought, man, this is weird. What is going on? And so I went in, and my wife was already in bed, and I went upstairs, and I said, Karen, something's wrong. I think you better get up. So she got up, she got dressed, and she came downstairs, and the time she came down, the pain had gone away. So I said, no big deal. It's probably something I ate tonight or, whatever. So just go back to bed. And so she went back upstairs, and I'm sitting there a little nervous now. And so I have a good friend of mine that goes to the church that I go to in Arizona, who's a medical doctor. He's actually in charge of emergency medicine at the University of Arizona. And if you've ever had a doctor, plumber, electrician, mechanic in your church, people are always going for free advice. Right? That just goes with the territory. If you have a skill, people are asking you about that skill, right? And so he was pretty used to it. So it's about 10:30 now at night. So I called Dan, and Dan and I are really good friends. I said, Dan, here's what happened. Should I worry about it? What should I do? And he said to me, now you got to remember, we're really good friends, but he said to me, what, are you stupid? That's what he said. He said, you need to go to the emergency room. Even if nothing's wrong, better safe than sorry. So I went back upstairs and I woke my wife up again. It was a little different encounter that time. I said, hey, I've talked to Dan. Dan thinks we need to go to the emergency room. And so she got up again. And by the time she came downstairs, the pain had come back with increased severity. I was having a difficult time breathing, and I was having a heart attack. So we get to the hospital and go through all the stuff you go through there, and they do all the things that they do. And the cardiologist came in about 3 o'clock in the morning or 3:30 in the morning, and said, typically we would do an angiogram and try to figure out where the blockages are, but we know there's something wrong. So we're just going to go ahead and go up and fix whatever's wrong. So you have to sign all these papers, right? If you've ever gone through it, you sign all the papers, giving them permission to do whatever. If they can do it with a stent, great. If they can't, they'll have to open you up, do bypass surgery, and you could die. Sign this paper, right? So, 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the morning, you're signing a paper and no idea what's going on. They take me down to the cath lab and go up, and we're able to open up the LAD. If you're familiar with it, it's called the Widowmaker. Typically, when it blocks, you die. And it was 95% blocked. And so they were able to open it up, put a stent in. They did it through my wrist, which I didn't even know they did. That was a weird thing. They put a little pressure cuff on, and every couple hours after it, they release a little pressure, and finally you're able to go home. So I went home the next day. Thought, heart attacks aren't so bad, right? This is pretty easy. Then you got to go for the follow-up appointment, right? You've been there. If you ever gone through anything, you go to that follow-up appointment. I walked into the office, and the cardiologist has all this stuff there, and he looks through all the labs, and he said, man, your cholesterol is 230, it's too high. You need to get cholesterol down. You need to lose some weight. You need to exercise more. You need to eat better. With your history, and we had some family history, but with your history and your numbers, the chances of another event are pretty significant. And so he gives me this whole thing. He gets done, and I said, okay, now, Doc, how many times have you given that speech? He said, well, hundreds of times. And I said, how many people change their life because you give them a speech? He said about 30%. In other words, 70% of cardiology patients will not make the lifestyle changes they need to make to avoid future events. I thought to myself, you do the exact same thing I do. Man, I go to churches all the time, and we give a speech, and we talk about what needs to happen, and not everybody likes it. And everybody wants to do it because it's too hard. And I said, you know what? I'm going to be one of those 30%. So I left out of that office that day and with a determination to make some changes. So I started having single cheeseburgers instead of double cheeseburgers. I started having small fries instead of large fries. I started walking up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. Eating better, exercising more, that's what he told me to do, right? And so I was trying to make the progress. And I went back in a couple of months later, I don't know, about 4 months later, and went in for the follow-up again, and he did all the lab work, and he said, man, nothing's changed. I said, your cholesterol is still too high, your weight's still, as a matter of fact, you put on a pound, and you need to take this seriously. I said, I did, your program doesn't work. Right? You said if I eat better and I exercise more, I'd be okay. Your program doesn't work. I thought to myself, again, that's exactly what happens in the church. It's a whole lot easier to blame the program than it is to make the changes necessary to get healthy. Now, I made a strategic mistake the second time. I took my wife with me. So she got to hear everything else the doctor said. So she began to take this seriously. Now she's holding me accountable. Oftentimes people say, well, why do we deliver assessment reports to anybody that wants to hear it? Because we want accountability. We don't want filters. We want everybody to hear the same thing. So my wife began to say, you need to really take this seriously. You need to do some things differently. And I said, okay, I'll work on it. Well, I travel an awful lot, not so much 2020, flexibility. But anyway, I travel an awful lot. I spend about 200 to 220 days a year on the road. And so it's a lot of travel. And if you ever traveled, it's very hard to get into any kind of exercise routines and all that. I said, I'll work on it. Well, I came home from a trip one Saturday. It was about 8:30 or so when I was pulling into my driveway. I have 2 adult daughters. At that time, they both lived in Arizona. But I have 2 adult daughters, and their cars were in my driveway. Thought, man, this is weird. It's 8:30 at night. My wife goes to bed at 9, so what is this? And I thought something's wrong, something's going on. So I walk in, and they're having an intervention. That's not what they called it, but it was obvious they were not leaving until we came up with a plan on how to move towards health. See, that's what we do with this whole transition period. We're not just going to wink our eyes and pretend. We're going to begin to address so that we can get healthier. So my youngest daughter was a swimmer in high school and became a runner after high school. And And she said, Dad, you need to take this seriously. I said, okay, I will. I said, no, we're not leaving until you come up with a plan. You tell churches all the time if they want to get healthier, they have to come up with a plan. They just can't hope it to be so. They have to be intentional about making it so. So we're not leaving until you come up with a plan. And my youngest daughter said to me, she said, Dad, I want you to run a marathon with me next year. So this was February 9th. She wanted me to run a marathon in Phoenix called the P.F. Chang's Marathon. It's in January every year. She said, Dad, I want you to run a marathon. I said, how far is that? She said, 26. I said, you're crazy. You see, I take very seriously the Proverbs that says, foolish is the man that runs when no one's chasing him. Right? I mean, I take that seriously. And I said, there's no way I can do that. She said, Dad, I want you to. And it was obvious they weren't going to leave until I said something. So I said, okay, I'll see what I can do. I'm not a runner, have never been a runner, and so I didn't know what to do. So I called up a friend of mine, a guy that attends my church who's a runner. And I said, Kevin, I'm going to run the marathon next January, and he runs it every year. I said, would you train me? Would you provide me some coaching? He said, I'd be glad to. He said, here's what you need to do. You need to be able to run 30 minutes without stopping. I'm thinking to myself, 30 minutes? You know how long that is? I'm thinking a donut break halfway, 30 minutes without stopping. And I said, there's no way. I couldn't run to the end of the block at that point, without taking a huge breath. And so he said, I want you to do that. And so I worked at it. This was in February, so probably April or May. I got to the place where I could go 30 minutes without stopping, not fast, just without stopping, because I don't do fast. It's like just to get there. So I called him up and I said, Kevin, I'm ready. I can do this 30 minutes now. What do you mean you're ready? He says, now you can start training. So he sends me a spreadsheet. Every day from that day until January race day, I had to do different things every day. Short runs, long runs, form runs, core development. Began to work my way through all the stuff I had to do every day. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world is that going to work? But I began to have accountability now. You see, my kids were asking. My wife was asking. So I started at it. Now, I can tell you, there was a lot of days that were ups and downs. It's not too bad when you're only doing a mile or two for your long runs. But when that starts getting up there to that 8, 9, 10 miles, that takes a long time. And when I'm on the road, that means the alarm clock goes off at 3 a.m. to get up to do a long run before I start my day. I'm going to tell you, whenever that alarm clock goes off, I would often say, you're crazy. You're not going to, this is nuts. Why in the world would you ever get up this early to do something you don't like? People talk about the runner's high. That's a figment of somebody's imagination. Man, all the time, that's somebody else, man, just excusing all of that, right? And so, but I did it. I began to work at it, began to get there, started at it. I was up to about 6 miles a day, and I got a phone call in September from my daughter, and she said, Dad, I can't run with you in January. I said, what do you mean you can't run? We're pregnant with our first granddaughter. I thought, thank you, Jesus. I don't have to do this. But she said, Dad, I want you to do it. So I kept to the running. Now, I don't know if you ever run a marathon or anything like that, but you have to pay people to suffer? So I got ready to register for this marathon, and they wanted money for me to run. How crazy is that? You want me to pay to suffer? Man, this is a parallel to the churches we work with all the time. You mean you want us to pay to go through pain? Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but when you sign up, they want to know what your pace is per mile, right? Because they put you in these little pins based on your time. And so I put slow. It wouldn't take it. They actually wanted a time to go in there. And so I picked the longest one I could find in their little options that they gave you as to how long it would be, because, man, my goal was to finish without dying, not to go, I'm not beating anybody's record. I don't care. So I choose it, I pay. Then I got to the end and it said, are you going to run the full marathon or the half marathon? Puh, didn't even know that was an option. Daughter never told me about a half marathon. So I figured she's not running, so who cares? I ran a marathon, so I put half, because that was only 13.1. I was pretty sure I could do that without dying because I was already up to 8 or 9 miles by that time, right? And so I signed up for the half marathon. I ran my first half marathon that year, and then I've continued to do that, except for this year. This is the first year in the last 8 that I haven't been able to run. I had a little accident in April where I got chemical burns on both of my legs that knocked me up for a long time. I still have them. I'm still struggling with the healing process that goes in the legs. I haven't been able to run all year. Now people say, well, do you love running that much? No, I run to eat. Right? Let's just be real clear about that. I run because I like eating, right? And what that looks like. But through that whole process, my cholesterol level began to go down. As a matter of fact, I just had a cardiology checkup in January this year. I do one every year. In January, my cholesterol is 120. Man, I am so excited about that and what that looks like. You don't know me back then, but I'm 40 pounds lighter than I was back then. Still a lot of room to go, but it's amazing the progress that happens as you begin to work through it and get healthier. I haven't had any other heart problems since then, which I'm grateful for. Why? Because I decided I want to get healthy. You say, why say all that? What's that have to do with our church assessment? Well, I think everything. Because here's the reality. Wherever we are, there's always room for improvement to increased health. So no matter where our starting place is, so we can get to a place where we think, well, I'm doing okay. But there's always room to get better, right, if we want to be intentional. But it has to be intentional. It has to involve a plan, and sometimes that plan requires sacrifice to do things differently than we've done them before. Okay, I'm going to introduce you to one of the themes you're going to hear, and that is simply this: change is not a swear word. Change is natural and normal for anything that's living. We're constantly changing, and every church that is alive is constantly changing and adapting. If you don't, you become irrelevant, and you no longer are reaching lost and broken people. You're caring for the found and not reaching the lost. Which requires us to say, okay, what's next? So, with that as a backdrop, let's talk about your current reality. Now, let me just tell you right from the very get-go, this will not be a hard report. Sometimes I deliver really hard reports because there's a lot of health indicators in this church, which is really exciting, right? I mean, there's some really good stuff that's going on. So our movement towards increased health is not overhaul, it's tweaking. Some churches we work with, it's an overhaul. And people get really mad at me during the assessment report. That's not the case here because there's so many positive indicators. It's just identifying what are the areas we need to address in order for us to move to increased health. So here's what we're going to do over the next little bit. We're going to talk about several different things. The first piece that we're going to talk about is what we call church health. Now, we'll spend more time here than any of the other sections, so don't get nervous about it. I mean, we're going to take a look at that in church health. We're going to talk a little about life cycle and where the church is at in the life cycle. We'll talk a little bit about statistics, and then we'll talk about what we call the leadership capacity, the leadership summary. Then we'll talk a little bit after the leadership summary about the lay survey and the comments. We call it the attitude survey. What's the attitude of the church towards the church as we look at that. Then we'll talk about first impressions. This is just from that one weekend. Now, we don't put a lot of stock in these anymore during COVID because nothing's normal. You know, we get every time we go to a gathering, it's different than it's ever been before. So we'll talk about some first impressions. We'll talk a little bit about worship, but it's more about just the online presence. It talks about facility, those kind of things, more than any others. Then I'll refer you to a place in the report called Summary of Conclusions, which kind of summarizes everything that I'm going to do and talk about tonight. And then we'll spend a little bit of time on recommendations. Now, it's really important to understand that tonight is a presentation. All right? In the days coming, you'll have conversation. All right? So tonight we're going to present the report, and like tomorrow, the staff's going to get together and begin to digest and work through the report. The leadership will do the same thing. The congregation will be invited, whether it's through Zoom meetings or in-person meetings, where you'll have a chance to ask questions after you have a chance to digest the report. So we don't want it to be an emotional response to the report. We want it to be a rational approach to the report as well. So we're going to give you a chance to look at it. So here's what's going to happen. The report itself is 70 pages. All right, so I'm not going to read 70 pages to you tonight. And all of God's people said, that would be really boring to do that. But we are going to look at the meat of it as far as the conclusions go. And then in the days ahead, you'll have conversation. So tomorrow, if you are on the church email list, you're going to get an email from the church office that will have an attachment with the entire report. It's in PDF format, so that you can look at it on your phone, your tablet, your computer, whatever it is, so that you'll have access to it. And if you don't know what a PDF is, what we need you to do is just contact the office and they will print a copy for you. All right? Because we get it. I mean, not everybody uses computer or tablet or telephone to read stuff. If that's you, then let the office know and they'll prepare a printed copy for you for this coming weekend. Right? So it's either PDF tomorrow by email. It'll go to anybody. If you're on the email list, or if you don't get emails and you want one, make sure you let somebody know your email address and they'll add it to that distribution list. But tomorrow it's going to come to you in full, and you can begin to digest it, look at it, take some notes, whatever you want to do as you digest the report, and then print it if you need it that way. All right? So we know whenever you do an assessment, you always want to jump to the conclusions of the recommendation. Right? You just want to, okay, tell me the bottom line. What do we need to do? Well, the problem is if you don't know the meat of the report, the recommendations aren't going to make a lot of sense to you. And often are subject to judgment without information. So what we try to do is give you the reason, the why, so that the what makes sense. See, our experience has been in a lot of churches, we address the what without addressing the why. So we introduce change that people resist because they don't understand the why. So tonight our focus is the why, the what you'll begin to digest, work your way through over the next several weeks as we do that. All right? So we're going to start with the church health piece and what that begins to look like. I did mention to you the questions will come after tonight. All right? They're going to come as you kind of walk your way through. Greg has all the answers, so he'll be able to answer every question you have. Or he'll make something up in doing that. But he's going to lead the discussion, the conversation, after the evening, after you have a chance to work at it. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about church health. Now, I know some of you may not be familiar with this tool. This is a tool that's put out by an organization called Natural Church Development. It's NCD for short. It gets a little confusing. We're NCS, they're NCD. Two different organizations, two complete different groups, two different kinds of things. Natural Church Development, or NCD, has been around now for almost 30 years. It's been used by over 82,000 churches around the world, translated into 25 different languages. It's been used in 70 different countries. In the United States alone, over 37,000 churches have used this tool to measure the health of the church in 8 characteristics. Now, what happened was we took a look at whether we were producing disciples or consumers of religion. See, there's a difference between going to church and consuming than it actually is to be on mission with Jesus. And so Christian Schwartz, who was the founder of NCD and now a whole team, they began to say, what would happen if we focused not so much on the fruit, but on the root that produces the fruit? In other words, are we actually doing things that's causing the church to be healthier, or are we just creating consumers of church? People that show up for the show, but never allow change or transformation. So in that question, they begin to do a research project, and they begin to identify what they call 8 essential characteristics of a healthy church. Doesn't mean it's the only thing you ever look at, but these 8 are essential. Now, because we live in America, we have a tendency to say, well, why do we need to focus on our weaknesses? Let's focus on our strengths, right? I mean, there's always that argument. The problem is these are essential things, not optional. In other words, they will determine our ability to be a healthy organism, and if one of them's not working, it will impact all of the others. It's kind of like your body, right? Cut off your arm, you can still survive. Take out your heart, you're not long to be here, right? There's essential parts of us that we have to have. And that's what this begins to identify in a church are some essentials. So in the research project, as they begin to look at healthy churches, they identified 8 of those, and they're on the screen. You can see them. Things like empowering leadership, gift-oriented or gift-based ministry, passionate spirituality, effective structures, inspiring worship, holistic small groups, need-oriented evangelism, and loving relationships. So here's the key. The key is the adjective. The survey measures the adjective, not the object of the adjective. So it doesn't measure whether you have leadership, it measures how empowered those leaders are. So the survey measures the adjective, and our strategies then to move to health has to address the adjective. Sometimes churches will look at this and say, well, we need to add more small groups because our holistic small groups are low. May not be the case. What you may need to do is figure out how to make your small groups more holistic, because that's the adjective. Now, for all of you that are used to standardized testing in schools, that's not this, right? The scale actually isn't 0 to 100, even though it is on the slide. It's possible to have a negative score. It's possible to have a score greater than 100. Because each year they take all the results of the surveys for that year and they determine the mean of the survey, which is always kept at 50. So the mean of the survey is 50. They adjust the highs and the lows to keep it there. And the survey measures your church's deviation from the mean. So it's how you deviated from 50. Right? So the mean is 50. It's a deviation. I just did a church 3 weeks ago where their average score was 6, and they had 4 that were below 0. Well, that's a different kind of report and the crisis that the church is in. Here, that's not the case. So it's a deviation from the mean. Now, there are 2 numbers to help you understand the scale. The first number is 65. 65 is considered the health line. So any characteristic that is 65 or higher is considered healthy. Now, here's the incredible genius of this survey. If a church scores 65 or higher in all 8 characteristics, now listen, 98% of the time, it's a growing church. Because the premise is this: healthy churches grow because that's what healthy churches do. Growth isn't the focus, health becomes the focus that enables us to increase our capacity. But 98% of the time, 65 or higher. We've been doing this now for over 20 years, and we know it to be true. We've done thousands of church health surveys in different churches, in different countries, in different languages, and it all plays the same. It's one of the reasons we've chosen to adapt this as one of our tools, because it crosses denominational lines, it crosses theological persuasions, it crosses location, culture, community, and country. Goes beyond all of those to help us understand how the church deviated from the mean of 50. Now, each country has its own mean. So all the churches in America have a mean that's kept at 50. Those are adjusted and your deviation is changed. Like when we do this in Eastern Europe or we do this in Africa, it's a different kind of measure because each country has its own research. So it's per country and what that looks like. So it's deviation. So 65 is the health line. That's our goal, is to get all 8 characteristics above 65. The other side of that is 35. 35 is considered the unhealthy line. So any characteristic 35 or below, unhealthy, requires an overhaul, radical change within the church. Good news here, there are no characteristics below 35. That's good news. And all of them are above the mean. That's good news. So what it simply means is tweaking, not overhaul. It's identifying our capacity limiters and begin to address those so we can increase the capacity of the church. The bad news is none of them are above 65. Right? You'll see all of them are very, very close between 50 and 60. So what we look at are the minimum factors or the lowest scores and say if we will tweak those, if we'll take a look at those, it will help us to increase the capacity of the other characteristics as well, because all of these are symbiotic to one another. So you don't just work on one, even though one may be a focus, it will impact the others tremendously. So you start working on, for instance, effective structures, it will have an impact on everything else you do. Improve your structures, and you're going to improve a lot of other things as well. So what we have done in the recommendations is to take a look at the limiting factors and say, okay, how do we increase those? Not overhaul, just some tweaking. What is that going to look like? What are some of the things we need to pay attention to increase the capacity of what that looks like? Now, if I were looking just at the church health scores, because all the scores are between 50 and 65, none above 65, none below 50. If we were to look at those, we would say the church is plateaued because it's just there. It's comfortable. We like it. Now, that's good news, and it can be really bad news. Because one of the huge barriers to any kind of change is being comfortable. We like this. The problem is none of us ever stay in one place. We're always moving, either to health or unhealth. We're either increasing our capacity or we're lowering our capacity, and we get to make those choices. So it is a good news, bad news kind of situation. Good news is it's not an overhaul. We don't have to make a radical change. Bad news is there's a level of comfort that may be a restrictor to our ability to make any change. Because when we're comfortable, we like it. Now, here's what happens. Most of us want to go back to what we know when we're comfortable. Man, if that hasn't been magnified this year, there's no other year it's ever been magnified, right? The one thing that COVID has done across America has caused us to begin to ask ourselves, what do we really value anyway? What's really important to us? And so part of that is to say, okay, how do we then increase our capacity? What does that look like? So the survey takes these 8 characteristics, breaks them down, each one into 4 subcategories. Gives you the same measurement, same 35, 50, 65, gives you a measurement in 4 subcategories. Because here's what happens. We look at these 8, and some of you going, well, I know what that is, but I'm not sure what that is, whichever one it is, right? So what's an effective structure? What does that look like, right? So what the survey does is give you more insight by giving you 4 subcategories to help you with developing your strategy to begin to increase the health of that characteristic. For example, taking a look at effective structures, which is your minimum factor, which is 54, we take a look then at these 4 subcategories, say, okay, what are the issues? What are the things that we need to look at during this season to get the church ready for the next season? So you'll see that effective planning is at 58, structures and systems are at 43. It's the lowest of the 4 subcategories. So when we start talking about raising the overall number, well, guess where we ought to focus? We ought to take a look at our systems and our structures to make sure that they are supporting where we want to go. Now, the problem with being comfortable is we often don't know where we want to go. We just want to stay where we are. But once we determine where we want to go, then what kind of structure or systems do we need to do to take us there? So you'll see in the recommendations, under the structure piece, we pay attention to the systems. So there's some things we want to address the systems, because if you can take that score of 43 and raise it and get it above the 50 mark and even closer to the 60 mark, all 4 of these will go up. And the overall score for effective structures goes up. So that's what we're talking about tweaking. Overhaul, you have to work on all 4 of them. Tweaking means let's figure out the one that we need to work on. So evaluating systems, taking a look at how we need to build good systems to take us where we want to go. Now here's the problem. When it comes to effective structures, this is the least spiritual of all 8 characteristics. Some people love structure and others are going, dude, let's just pray harder. That's not very spiritual, right? What that is. But it's critically important to support what you want to do direction-wise. So effective structure is the minimum factor, the limiting factor to your capacity, and specifically the systems and the structure. Then we move on down to the other ones in the order from the lowest to the highest, and you'll notice that all of them are very, very close. So there's certain things that we're just going to pick out to work on, not the overall characteristic that we need to work on. So for instance, when it gets to need-oriented evangelism, in other words, do we know the needs of the people around us, and we adjusted our priorities to reach the needs of the lost and broken? So we talk about being a compassionate church, corporate evangelism, personal evangelism, and being seeker-sensitive. So the good news is there's some scores, the 62 of being seeker-sensitive. In other words, we've created an environment where we believe it's comfortable for people that are seeking to find. We're able to have an open acceptance where we accept all people. We don't try to make judgments. We don't pass judgments. So being seeker-sensitive is really healthy. The lower factor is to be a compassionate church. Now, people get really ticked off about this one. That's low one. We're compassionate. We care about people. That's not what we're talking about here. Compassionate in this context means, do I know the needs of the community, and have we adjusted our priorities to meet the needs of the community? So often in the church, we adjust our priorities to meet the needs of those that attend. When people begin to complain about whatever they're complaining about, right? Here we're talking about understanding the needs of the community and adjusting our priorities to meet the needs of the community so that we can have spiritual conversations. So you'll see part of the recommendation is to a community needs assessment to take a look at how do we determine what those needs are. Now that influences dramatically who the next pastor is going to be. Because part of the reality is whoever the next pastor is going to be, you want to make sure that that person actually loves the community, not just the church. That's critically important. I've met a lot of pastors that hate where they live. They like the people, but they hate the place. Well, you all know if you hate the place you live in, it's not going to be long until you move. So you got to love where you live. And in order to do that, you need to understand the place that you live with new insight. So we're going to pay attention to what that looks like. Again, see, we're not talking about overhauling completely. We're just talking about identifying some of those things that we can work on to tweak to help us move to increased health in that particular area. The third area that we talk about here is holistic small groups. We talk about holistic small groups as a place for people to connect, and you'll see here that there's some scores that are healthy, like group relevance. In other words, your existing groups are connecting with people that attend. Okay? Now, we're not talking about whether you have enough groups. We're not talking about whether everybody's involved in a group. Remember, we're not measuring the small group. We're measuring the holistic part of the small groups. So your current groups, then, are relevant to those that are currently attending. That's good news. Who wants to go to a small group you don't like? You like the people, but you hate the topic, right? Or whatever they're going to do. It's relevant to life. It's relevant to the questions that you're asking and working your way through right now. That's good news, good, healthy characteristic as well. But then we talk about this idea of integrating multiplication and creating spiritual community. And again, all of them are above 50, so it's not overhaul. It's just how can we make sure that people that are engaged in a small group are enjoying spiritual community together, not just getting together because they like each other or they like the topic, where we actually pray for each other, we actually support each other, we actually encourage each other, we hold each other accountable, whatever it might look like. That's a spiritual community piece. Again, not unhealthy, just a few tweaks to be intentional about what that looks like. And then integrating people and multiplying groups, that's about participation. And that's part of your evaluation that you look at and say, okay, now we all get it. You know, COVID has thrown a wrinkle into a lot of different kinds of things. We get all that. But thinking about pre-COVID, what's the participation level of people in small groups? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? Then how do you increase the capacity for more people to get engaged in small groups? And it's caused the church to be creative in how you do small groups, whether they're online small groups, whether they're in-person small groups, whatever that might look like. But asking yourself, what's the participation level? Because those are the areas that help increase that score is to figure out ways to engage more people in small groups as well. All right, then we move into gift-based ministry. And gift-based ministry deals with the whole idea of helping people know their gifts, develop those gifts, and use those gifts according to God's call and passion. It's everybody doing what they're gifted, called, and passionate to do. So, ready? I'm gonna give everybody permission tonight. Ready? If you're doing something you're not gifted, called, or passionate about, you gotta stop. I said that one time, and a lady in the back raised her hand and said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "I quit." She goes, "I've been the missionary leader around this church for the last 2 years, and I hate it. I quit." I it's a good idea. I think you ought to quit. I'm going home tomorrow. Right? I do that. I don't suggest you raise your hand and quit, but if you're doing something you're not called, gifted, and passionate about, don't do it, because that means you're not doing something you're gifted, called, and passionate to do. Because we all have limited capacity. So figure out what that looks like. You know, helping people live into their passions. If you're passionate about children, work with children. If you're passionate about youth, work with teenagers. If you're passionate about prayer, lead prayer. What are you passionate about, and how has God gifted you and wired you to be able to do that more effectively? I did youth ministry for a lot of years, and I used to always have a philosophy: if you don't like teenagers, don't work with them. It won't be fun. You got to like where you are, right? And what that begins to look like. That's what we're talking about here. And so it's, how do you integrate gifts into ministry? In other words, how do you integrate what God's given you to do or gifted you to do with your passions and your call? So if God's gifted you the ability to teach, where should you teach? It may not be children. It may not be youth. It may be something else. It may not even be a Sunday school class. It may be something else. So that's what we're talking about, integrating how God's gifted you into effective ministry, so that you're able to do what God's called you to do as well as match up to your passions. We've made a mistake sometimes in the church. We make the assumption that if somebody has the spiritual gift of teaching, they can teach anyone, anytime. Well, you know that's not true. I'm telling you right now, I love children, but I am not volunteering for children's ministry. It's not my thing. Doesn't mean children are bad. I like them. But not in a leadership position or teaching position, because that's not my thing. Now, in this group, it might be a little different, and I love working with teenagers, and so I can talk about using that spiritual gift of teaching with teenagers. That's what we're talking about, integration of gifts into ministry. Again, that scores just below the 65 at 56. We're just talking about tweaking. Some of that's just giving people permission to stop doing or start doing. See, often in the church, we don't have a pattern for people to stop doing what they're no longer passionate about. Because sometimes we think that if you take an assignment in the church, it's a life sentence. So the only way I know to stop is to change churches and not volunteer for that in the new church. We got to have a path, because life changes, interests change, passions change. Or just because you've always done it doesn't mean you always have to do it. So that's what we're talking about, integration. Significance of ministry, that deals with the whole idea of celebrating what people do. It's acknowledging that what you do is really important to the body life of the church, and that there is no unimportant jobs within ministry. All of them are critically important. And we talk about support for ministry, and then the lowest of the four was equipping. Now, support means that you have the resources to do what you're being asked to do. Equipping means you're trained to do what you're asked to do. I can't tell you, I've done this way too many times. There are a lot of governing boards that people on them have never been trained as governing board members. They learned from people that learned from people that learned from people. So if what they learned at the beginning was dysfunction, guess what they've learned? Dysfunction. So it's the whole idea of equipping people to more effectively do what you're asking them to do, not just letting them hang out to dry. But you want them to be as equipped as they can to be as effective. Now that score is below the 50 mark, so there's a little more work that we need to do in the equipping area. So anytime anyone steps into any kind of ministry position, there ought to be training and resourcing offered to that person so they could do it more effectively. And unfortunately, we really don't pay attention to that a lot in the church, which can get us in trouble as well. So gift-based ministry. Then we talk about loving relationships. Hey, here's the good news, and we always get excited whenever this shows up. You like each other. I mean, you all don't understand. There are a lot of churches people attend, they don't like each other. I mean, they won't talk to each other. They'll sit on different sides of the sanctuary because they don't want to interact. They don't want to react, and they don't like each other. That's not the case here. The good news is you like each other. The even better news is you can improve it, so that you're a little more all-inclusive. So we talk about affirmation and atmosphere and deepening of relationships and conflict resolution. See, here's what happens in the church sometimes. For us that are engaged, that are involved, that have been attending a while, we feel like we've got good relationships. But sometimes when a new person comes in, there's not a pathway for them to get engaged or involved. Not a way for them to make sure that they are connected in a relational kind of way. Sometimes people will describe it. When I came to the church first, it was like I broke into somebody else's family reunion. Right? Because we all like each other. We all know each other. We all know our patterns. We know those kind of, we're talking about here is increasing the capacity to be able to do it even more effectively. To paying attention to creating pathways for people to get engaged and intentionally celebrating, intentionally creating that sense of joy. Hey, we are people of hope. And if there ought to be a group of people when they get together that ought to be joyful, it's us. Man, we're people of hope. We're not people of despair. We're not people of fear. We're people of hope. And so there ought to be that sense of atmosphere of acceptance and joy and say, man, we are so glad you're here because you get to experience what we've experienced. And it's a good thing. Again, not bad, just some tweaking. And again, as you move down, you see the scores begin to go up overall. So then we move into inspiring worship, which is always a great one to talk about because it deals with the whole idea of our worship experience, the worship service, where people are being transformed. It's seen as being guest-friendly, where there's great anticipation and there's relevance of message. Now, during transition, we don't pay a lot of attention to relevance of message, all right? Because we're in interim and all of those kind of pieces. We don't know how you judge that. Previous pastor, current pastor, interim pastors, any of those kind of things. So we don't pay a lot of attention to that. What we do pay attention to is the anticipation level. Again, that's just below the 50 mark. But here's the reality. If you have great anticipation for worship, it's very easy to invite your friends. It's very easy to invite your family when there's great anticipation. Kind of like anything you go to, anything you've ever experienced. If you have high anticipation, you want people to experience it with you. And that's what we want to begin to work on. How do you begin to build anticipation for a worship experience that becomes transforming? Now, we get it. We're in a different kind of stage right now. We're trying to figure this all out and what that's going to look like as we go along. But we do want to be intentional about creating that sense of excitement, where there's a little bit of a sense of wonder and awe. See, here's been our experience, maybe yours as well, that in worship in the Christian church today, we're missing often the sense of awe, the sense of mystery, the sense of what's God going to do today. That's expectation. Often we come to church knowing what God's going to do. Yeah, same thing we experienced last week. Same way we experienced it. So the idea of building anticipation is that sense of awe, that sense of mystery as we begin to worship Him. And you all know, man, there's some things about God we don't have figured out yet. There's a sense of mystery to everything that God is. Once you think you've got it all figured out, God's going to change it all up, which forces us then to begin to explore what's God up to. Well, what's He want to do? Then we talk about passion spirituality. And again, we're at the top couple. You'll see inspiring worship and passion spirituality are the same scores, 57. And again, you take a look at the things that are good. Passion for devotions, which is exciting. That means you love Jesus. So you love each other. you love your church, and you love Jesus. That's good news. Man, if you didn't like each other and you didn't like your church and you didn't like Jesus, we'd have a problem. I'd have to have a whole revival, man, something, right? The good news is you're there, so that's exciting because it's not a matter of having to create that. It's already there. What we want to do is begin to see what we need to work on. So one of the keys in devotions is what we call experiencing God. In other words, am I experiencing God on a daily basis throughout my life? Not just on Sunday when I come together to worship experience, not just when I'm in my small group, but am I experiencing God throughout my life? And so the whole idea, and part of the challenge that the church is faced over the last 10 years is how do we tell story when everything's changed? See, I grew up in a church where we had Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. And oftentimes we'd have what was called testimony services. Anybody ever around the church long enough to do that? Right? Where he told story. So we've lost the art of telling story. And as a result of, now I'm not saying go back to any of that, but new ways and new expressions of how to tell story become critically important to create a climate where if God did it for you, maybe he'll do it for me. Man, I'm right in the middle of what you just talked about. Maybe God's got something for me. So all of a sudden our attitude's different. We look at it in a different way, right? We begin to experience God in new and fresh ways. So part of our challenge is how do you tell story in a different era? What does that begin to look like? To hear what God is doing. Now, I get it. I mean, I pastored long enough to know, and sometimes testimony nights became really boring. You know, you had people saying the exact same thing they said last time you did it. You know, it's just got repeating the story. Okay, I already know that. So we started, when we still did testimonies, we started by saying, okay, you can only give a testimony if it's something God's done new and fresh in the last 2 weeks. And we gave everybody what we called flat tire testimonies once a year. A time where your tire went flat and somebody stopped and helped you, right? You get one flat tire testimony a year. We want to know what God's doing in you, in your circumstances. And so it's that idea of telling story. How do we do that, right? And that's what we're talking about here when it comes to experiencing God and how is God working. The last one we talk about is empowering leadership. We always get really excited when this is one of the higher scores because it means we're giving away responsibility. And so people are in the right places in leadership fit. See, a lot of times when your spiritual gift score is low and the leadership fit score is low, it means we have to pay attention to help people exit and find the right places. Here, that's not the case. Again, 62. And the compelling vision piece at 70 means there's been a vision that's been directing some of the decisions that have happened over the last few years. And there's a sense that people understand where we're headed. Now, empowering others and delegation of ministry is really important. Now, we're not talking about people doing jobs. See, we're really good in the church at twisting arms, getting somebody to do something for us. We're talking about delegating responsibility for the ministry. That means you can do it different than it's ever been done before. See, there's a lot of people that won't step into leadership because they don't want to do it like the other person did it. Delegation of ministry means we give away responsibility. Now, the moment you give away responsibility, there is risk involved because they may do it really different than it's ever been done. But it's that idea of giving away the responsibility. Again, that score is right at the 50. We're not talking about overhaul. We're just talking about tweaking and being intentional in what that looks like. So we take all 32 scores, 8 characteristics times 4. There's 32 scores. We identify what we call the highest 5, the things that we would consider the strengths of the church, which deal with group relevance, compelling vision, visitor friendly, passion for devotions, and leadership fit. In other words, people are in the right places. They love Jesus and they're serving Jesus. The church is seen as being accepting and welcoming to people, where there's a vision that's guiding our decisions and groups are relevant. So those are the 5 highest. So when we start talking about recommendations, we look at the 5 lowest areas because they become our priorities. And you'll see they include things like structure and systems, that's the lowest. Experiencing God, how do we help people to experience God on a regular basis? Equipping people for ministry, making sure everyone is spiritually connected, whether it's through small group or whatever that method might be, but make sure everybody's spiritually connected, and anticipation for worship, adding the sense of awe and mystery. So those 5 become our priorities as we begin to identify some of the things that we can do to move towards increased health. So here's what we do. We take a look at all those scores, then we compare them to the other 2 overall aspects, which is a life cycle and statistics. So we look at church health, life cycle, statistics. So what we ask you to do in the area of life cycle is to say, okay, where do you see yourself in the life cycle? Because every church has a beginning and every church will have an ending. No church will last forever. I mean, every church the Apostle Paul started is no longer in existence. That doesn't make Paul an ineffective church planner. It just means things have a beginning and things have an ending. Now, for us, all of us, we look at our chronological age to help us know where we are in the life cycle, right? In the church, it's not chronological, it's attitudinal. It's our attitude, it's how we look at things. So we begin to ask you, how would you describe your church? We gave you some characteristics, and we ask you to scale those on a scale of 0 to 4. 0 being, that doesn't describe us. 4, it describes us all the time. So as we put all those together, here's where we begin to see where the church saw itself. And I think, hold on just a second. I need to look here quick. Because I don't think that's the right slide for you. Oh, it is. Good. Just want to make sure that we had the right slide. So you'll see in the scoring of where you saw yourself, the red is in the wrong place. That's the challenge. That's what messed me up. The red should be over in a different place. I'll show you where it's supposed to be in a minute in doing that. So 0 to 4, 0 not at all, 4 all the time. And so what we do is we say, okay, what are the 0s to 1? The ones that are, those characteristics really don't describe us. It's not where we are currently. So here's the duh moment of the night. You ready? You weren't just born. Right? I know. It's a shock. Reality is we're not in the birth stage at all. But then we begin to identify the 1s and the 2s, which means it describes where we are some of the time, but not themes. It's just some of those characteristics are showing up. So you'll see that death and growth were those 2 that kind of fit in that category. That really doesn't describe us. And then we look at the 2s and 3s, and that's really where we begin to focus our attention, because most churches don't score pure any of those because we're always moving. So if you look at the 2s and 3s, you begin to see that decline and dropout characteristics are beginning to show up. And decline means we're declining in numbers, dropout means we're declining in workers. All right, so declining in numbers, declining in workers. But then we look at the ones that are 3s to 4s to 4s, which means it's more prevalent at the current reality. And you'll see that maturity and plateau is where most people would see the church. In other words, it's one of the most comfortable times you can have. Now, we would make the argument, based on your church health scores and based on your attendance and statistical trends, that the church is more in plateau than it is in maturity. That's at a place of comfortableness, not declining some, but not quite, but in that plateau stage. So if we were to place you on the life cycle, based on the characteristics, based on the church health scores, based on the statistics, we would say the church is at the plateau stage of what that looks like. So then we say, okay, if that's where we see ourselves in attitude, where does it play out when it comes to the statistical piece of that? So here's your average worship attendance, not including this year, because this year's weird, right? So, but the average kind of worship attendance. And so what we see is that there's a comfort zone that the church has a tendency to stay within, somewhere between 325 and 375. Within that 50 number is where the church has bounced for the last 10 years. And you'll notice whenever the church gets to a spike, there's a decline. And when it gets too low, there's a growth spot. In other words, we all do this. We have a tendency where we're comfortable. Our structures, our systems, our staffing, it's comfortable right here. To move into the growth zone above the 325 requires change. And if we fall below our comfort zone, it's going to require change we don't want. So there's that stage over the last 10 years that there's been this ebb and flow, but if we were to look at it, we would say the church has plateaued. It's at that, we've done everything we can to stay comfortable. And here's where we identify comfortable as far as attendance goes. Then we take a look at the giving patterns, and you'll notice that the giving patterns, follow that same kind of pattern where we're comfortable at this giving rate. There's been a spike, and probably some reasons for that if we went back to 2012 and figured out what that spike was. But basically, for the last 10 years, we've averaged about the same. In other words, everything in statistics says it's plateaued. Everything in the church health score says plateau. And everything in the life cycle says we're at plateau. That's where we are. Now, it's not a bad place, it's not a good place, but it is the most dangerous place. Because at plateau, we get comfortable, and if we don't do anything, you will always continue down the life cycle. You never stay at one stage. There's always a change. What we have learned is it is possible to extend the life cycle of the church, but you have to do it intentionally. In other words, to move back into a growth zone won't be a result of a new pastor. It won't be a result of some new emphasis. It will be a result of some changes that we make in our health to get us healthier, to increase our capacity. So here's what we need to pay attention to. See, the churches put way too much pressure on a lot of pastors. Let's just find a new pastor that'll help us to grow again. Well, that's not fair. We need to take a look at ourselves and say, what do we need to do to prepare ourselves to move back into the growth zone? And I'm going to tell you, it's a lot of work. It will not happen just because you will it to happen. It will happen because you intentionally put a plan together to move back into the growth zone. And I'm going to tell you, the alarm clock's going to go off at 3 o'clock in the morning sometimes, and you won't like it. It'll be hard. It'll require us to do some things that we haven't done before. It requires us to have a little different focus. And it may not always be easy. But here's what I can tell you with all the confidence in the world. It will be worth it. Because more people will come to know Jesus, and you'll have greater kingdom impact than you've ever had before. That doesn't mean what you've done has been bad at all. It just means how do we increase our capacity now to reach more people, to make greater kingdom impact. Because reality is you have a lot of resources. You have a lot of people resources, you have a lot of facility resources, you have financial resources, and to whom much has been given, much is required. You see, God's chosen the church, he has no plan B. We're it to make the manifold wisdom of God known to this generation. Can I tell you, it will not matter who's in the White House. It's up to you and me to be the hands and feet of Jesus and to be on mission with him. And that sometimes requires some work to be able to do that. But I'm going to encourage you, it's worth it. As you increase your health, you increase your capacity to do it more effectively. All right, then we took a look at what we call leadership capacity. This is the staff and the governing board. Together, we just looked at what that capacity was. Now, if you're on the board or if you're a staff member, don't take anything I'm about to say personally. All right? I mean, because the reality is you are who you are, and it's okay. What we're looking for is balance and capacity of what that looks like. So we did that in a couple different ways. The first way we did it was identifying leadership style. Now, there's some really good news about this because with the staff and the governing board, there's some good balance here. When we take a look at the leadership style, there were two leaders that had what we call pioneering leadership style. Pioneers are the risk takers. Y'all know in the church you have why people and why not people. Right? Any new idea, they go, why are we doing that? Or you got people that say, why not? Pioneers are the why not people. They're risk takers. They're not afraid of change. Actually, they embrace it and they thrive on it, of what that looks like. Then you have two that have what we call strategic. They're the ones that can take the dreams of the pioneers and make them reality. They can put a plan together. Then you have three that have what we call management style. Managers are the ones that manage what is very well. So they take what the current reality is and they manage that current reality. Then you have four leaders that have a team approach. Those leaders like to work better in a team where they can collaborate and come up with mutual solutions as opposed to a pioneer or a strategic person in team. And then you have four that are pastoral. Pastoral leaders are not necessarily always pastors. Pastoral leaders are the ones that care deeply about people. Their heart beats for other people, and they're concerned about them. And then you had three that had encouragement. You're going, we didn't have that many leaders. That's because some have more than one style. All right? Some will have one or two styles that are at work. The encouraging leaders are the ones that encourage people along the journey. They have a tendency to build rapport and to build cooperation so that begin to build trust so we can encourage people to understand and to own the plan. So the great news of a leadership style is the balance that you currently have. Oh, man, I wish that was the case in every church we work with. It's always not. But here you've got good balance, so that's exciting. Then we asked the governing board. Now this is the governing board only. We asked them to evaluate their effectiveness. We gave them some scoring sheets that they did and some characteristics. And the scoring came back at 37.86, which simply means their view of how they operate together is to be above average in effectiveness. Now that's good news. They feel like they're doing the job that they've been called and asked to do. Then we took a look at spiritual gifts and some of the spiritual gifts that were involved. And so the primary gifts for the leadership team, this is now staff and board, included hospitality, evangelism, administration, discernment, leadership, and encouragement. Those are all strong leadership gifts. The gifts that weren't as well represented were exhortation, faith, shepherding, service, creative communication, apostle, and craftsmanship. So those are the ones that weren't as represented on the team. Now, what does that mean? Well, the spiritual gift mix of the current leadership team is designed well to make others feel welcome and accepted, to communicate God's word effectively, and to execute plans and manage wisely. So that's good news. Now, the opposite side of that coin is the team may struggle in trusting God to act, guiding and nurturing people, and meeting the practical needs of others and with creativity. In other words, when it gets outside the box thinking, the team may struggle a little bit trying to figure out what that's going to look like. We operate well within certain guardrails, but once you get outside those, the team may struggle with that creativity in doing that. Then we took a look at personality. Now, every time I get here, I have to say in my mind, move on. I have a tendency to want to stay here too long. All of my graduate work is in counseling, and so I've tried to become students of people. It's a curse, trying to figure out what personalities people are by my interaction with them as to where they fit in doing that. But we did that with your leadership team, again, church board and staff, to kind of figure out what the balance of the personalities were. Now, it doesn't matter what profile you use. There are 4 basic personality types in doing that. You could use the DISC, if you're familiar with that, perhaps at work, the dominant, the influencer, the steady, the compliant. Some people like the animals, the beaver, the golden retriever, the otter, the lion, talk about personalities. We use an organization that's called Lit Towers, and not because it's necessarily the best, but it's free. Right? We have a partnership with them, and as long as we do church leadership, they let us use their tools for free, which is a good thing for churches as well. But they use the language choleric, sanguine, melancholy, phlegmatic. Some of you probably have heard those along the way in doing that. So let me just give you a real quick synopsis. When we talk about the sanguine, we're talking about creative, energetic, life of the party kind of people. They're the kind of people, they don't care how long meetings go as long as we're having fun. Right? That's their whole, it usually involves food. That's the sanguine kind of personality. They're just life of the party. They're the ones you want around. You like to be around them because they're fun to do that. Then you have the clerics. The clerics are the bosses. They hate long meetings. Man, give me the facts, make a decision, and move on. We don't need all this talk, right, in what that looks like. And so they're the bosses. They're the energy. They are what we call the gas pedal in the church. The sanguines are the engines. The clerics are the gas pedal that make the thing go forward, right? And so you got those kind of folk. They think they're always right, right? The problem is oftentimes they are, but they're annoying sometimes in what they do. So the clerics. Then you have the melancholies. The melancholies are the detailed perfectionist. They can give you 10 reasons why something won't work. They don't even have to think about it. You get a new idea, they can go right through all the things you need to think about, right? They're what we call the brake of the church. Whenever those clerics get too on the gas, they shift over and put the brake on. Have you thought about this? 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 So they're always slowing things down. Now, don't misunderstand, all four are critically important. Then you have the phlegmatics. The phlegmatics are the peacemakers. They just want everybody to get along. And so when they're on the leadership team, they don't like to make decisions because somebody might not like it. And oftentimes in churches, what that sounds like is, I think we need to take some time to pray about that. Because prayer is always okay in the church, right? Who's going to argue with that? But oftentimes, it's a delay tactic not to make decisions that need to be made because they don't want to upset anybody. You can always tell the phlegmatics are always concerned about everybody. Is it too hot here? Is it too cold? You need something to drink? They're the ones that are always concerned about people. So you can always tell who they are in a group when you just kind of observe them. So those are the four basic personality types. Now the problem is, if you're a cleric married to a melancholy, you've got some conflict sometimes. It just happens. Because you're going, go, the other person's going, stop. And what that looks like. Now, my wife and I are that way. I'm a cleric sanguine. My wife is a melancholy phlegmatic. I spent the first 3 years of our marriage trying to fix her. I thought she was broke. Yeah, no, that wasn't a good strategy. Just trust me. Now, we've been married 42 years, so it's okay. But you live and have to work through that because she didn't need fixed. We need to learn about each other to realize God put us together to make us complete. And that's what happens in a leadership team. It's not that one style is better than the other. It's all four styles that are working together. You need people that are concerned about other people. You need people that will pay attention to detail. You need people who will make decisions, and you need people that are creative and off the chart and ready to try new things. All four, critically important. Balance is what we're looking for. So in the current leadership staff, you have 3 that are the sanguine, you have 4 that are the clerics, 2 that are melancholy, and 2 that are phlegmatic, and even the phlegmatics is a lower score overall. Now, what does that mean? That means the current leadership can make decisions quickly and sometimes with creativity, but there may not be anyone that will speak up and say, how's this going to impact everybody? So you're good at judging the facts, making a decision, but is there anybody that feels comfortable? Because that score is at 9.50, which is a low overall score for the phlegmatic. And so what happens is, even if phlegmatic is your primary personality, it can be shut down by those that are a little louder and those that are a little more strong in their personality types. So often you can make a decision, but we haven't thought about how this is going to impact everybody. So you make a change in the church. Well, it sounds good. We thought it through. Let's just make that change. Let's go. We're going to announce it on Sunday. Yeah, but how's so-and-so going to react? Or how's so-and-so going to react? Well, who cares? It's the right decision, right? So the balance is critical because you can avoid a whole lot of heartache if you pay attention to people. If you have somebody that's always bringing you back to caring about people. So good news is you got some good, strong leaders, but you may also want to add some that care deeply about how people are going to react or respond to whatever the church is going to do. Then we did all those surveys. Remember all those? Those interviews, those written surveys that you turned in. We had 54 written surveys turned in, and we did 55 face-to-face interviews for a total of 103 different people. Now, it's really important you understand that, because right now the sanguine ones are going, man, there are numbers up there? And the melancholies are going, man, I hope nobody notices that doesn't add up. Right? And the clerks are going, move on. Right? I already know what it means. It means 103 different people participated in the written surveys or the face-to-face interviews. Well, in those, we had an idea of who took the survey. So we broke them down in ages, and you'll see the age breakdown here. So we had a good representation across the board, which is always what we look for. We don't always get that in the church, but here we were able to get all the different ages across the board, from some younger folk to those that have been here a long time. It gives us an accurate picture across the board. So we get excited about that whenever that begins to happen. Then we also break it down by male and female. 64% female, 38% male that participated. Our normal is about 60-40 because guys don't like to write stuff down, especially when they have to think it through and come up with an opinion. And doing that, it just takes too long in what that looks like. But we had a relatively good mixture of people, a little more dominated by females, which could be the church mix as well. We just don't know that. But in the survey, that's who participated. We asked people, how long have you been a Christian? And you'll see that the vast majority of those that took part have been Christians a long time. Some over 80%, almost 90% longer than 15 years as Christians. Right? So they've been around for a while. And what that looks like. So then we asked the question, how long have you attended North Park? Right? This is how long you've been a Christ follower. How long have you attended North Park? And we had it all across the board. There's a good number of people that have come to the church in the last 5 years. And every 5-year period, there's been new people that have continued to come. Now, really, really important to understand that although you have a significant part, over 50% that have been here less than 15 years. But if you go back to this slide, you'll see that the vast majority were already Christian. So the conclusion would simply be those that are currently attending came as already believers. In other words, the church is equipped to reach people who are already Jesus followers, but may struggle in connecting with the lost and the broken who do not yet know Jesus. That's really important because there's a reason you get to the plateau stage and not going to the growth stage if all you're doing is reaching sheep that are changing pastures. For whatever reason, they moved here, church closed, whatever the reason, but it's been sheep changing pastures, not reaching the lost sheep. So we just say come to grips with that and say, okay, maybe we need to do things differently, because if we really believe our purpose is to reach lost and broken people, then we have to acknowledge that we're not doing that currently. So what does it take to be able to really engage lost and broken people? Then we begin to ask the question, what are the things that are most important? We gave you 7 things. It's not the only things you ought to look at, but we gave you 7. Just ask you to rank them on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 being the most important thing, 7 being the least important thing as it currently exists. You identified worship, prayer, evangelism, community services, fellowship, discipleship, and international missions as the things in that order. Then we said, how would you like them to be? Same scaling, same thing that we did. You'll see that prayer, worship, and discipleship were pretty even. And then evangelism, fellowship, and community service begin to fit into that. Now, let me just throw it up there, because international missions was after community service. Just get on the slide. But if you pull them together, here's what it looked like. Worship, prayer, worship, prayer. Number 1, number 2, both cases, they are. We currently desire them to be. Evangelism, current, you identified it as 3, as a current priority. Now, you got to acknowledge you're not being effective, but it's the 3rd highest priority. Then we move discipleship all the way from 6 up to 3. In other words, there's a need to develop a plan to help people grow in their faith and develop in their faith. and then evangelism, fellowship, community service, and international missions. International missions, both at the end of that, there is a desire for discipleship to become more important in the priorities. But if you look at the scaling, it's about the same. Prayer, worship, and discipleship were all very even as far as what people saw. Some saw it as number one, some saw it 2, 3, all over the map between those three. Right? So those are always 1, 2s, or 3s, what that looked like. Begin to say if the church was to assess a need right now, it would be in the area of discipleship. That we need to create a path and a plan for people to grow in their faith. Now, I would suggest that it's not just growing your faith, but it's also joining Jesus on the mission field. That's a part of discipleship. So you can't be a disciple if you're not a follower. See, sometimes we think discipleship is a Bible study, a class, going through some process. The reality is being a disciple means I become a Jesus follower, which means I join Jesus on the mission field. That's what he prayed, right? He looked at the people that were helpless and he said, God, send out workers into the harvest field. In other words, if you're going to follow Jesus, you got to get in the field. You don't follow Jesus in the church. That'll mess us up. The church ought to be equipping us to send us to the field. Which really becomes the essence of what we're talking about. Then we ask the question, this is always interesting in churches that are in plateau stage and where there's a level of comfort. We ask the question, do you think your church needs change? 4% said radical change, 13% said significant, 23% said some, 55% said, oh, okay, a little bit. And 2% said, nope, we're good. So you'll see there's not a real sense of urgency to make any changes because we have a sense of comfort. That's a typical characteristic of plateau, where we are comfortable where we are. The problem is if we want to go where God wants us to go, it will require us to always be changing, always doing things a little differently to figure out what's next. Then we wanted to know how engaged are people in wanting somebody else to speak in to that by outside help, a tips pastor, a consultant, or whatever it might be. What does that look like? Well, 9% said we need intervention, not just help. 13% said we need assistance right now. 47% said, okay, maybe a little later. Okay, not right now, but soon. And then some said, well, maybe sometime in the future. And 9% said, no, we're good. See, that's comfort. That's that idea of everything we look at is comfort and plateau. That most people would be okay if we just kept things right where we are. The problem is we never stay where we are. When we get lax, then we move towards unhealth. To be healthy requires constant attention to what we need to do. And somehow we can get a hold of that God's always taking us towards health. Then we wanted to know how willing are people to engage in the process and help. Good news is there was a pretty significant level of commitment to the church. Over half said, I'm willing to do whatever I can or whatever it takes. So there's a level of people's involvement and commitment to the church as long as you do what I want you to do. Right? Because it's not change, it's not any of that, but if you just keep doing what we're doing, I'm willing to step up. Now, some said, you know what, I'm pretty tapped out. I'm not sure I can do any more, within certain limits or none at all in doing that. So there is a good portion of the church that wants to engage and is willing to do what's needed as long as the change isn't too radical. And what that looks like. Then we want to know the financial capacity. So we talked about willingness to give. Here's the reality. Your financial potential is pretty tapped out. You're at about where the church is going to be. There's not this whole level of people over here waiting to give towards something new. You're pretty much living and have to live within that cap that you enjoy right now. Until there's an increase in numbers, until more people get engaged, more people get involved, you just need to understand in your financial planning, you're at that max or near max of the capacity. It's really important to know because if you start something new that's going to require a heavy commitment, this would not be the season to do that. See, if I were to look at this, I would say, okay, we're not doing a building program, right? Or anything that's going to require, because people are at that max of what that looks like. Then we begin to get it to the place in that lay survey where we just ask you some questions. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but we just ask you some questions. What do you think the church is doing really well, that you really like? We call it achievements that are strong. You said youth ministry, worship, children's ministry, community outreach, upward basketball, celebrate recovery, grief share, welcoming and friendly, and working with schools were the things that you mentioned as current achievements. The other side of that coin is we ask what were the hindrances? What were the things that were keeping you from accomplishing and living into it? Lack of leadership development, lack of an assimilation plan, resistance to change, lack of programs for senior adults, lack of unity, and COVID. Right now, COVID's making the list every time we do this across the country in doing that. But it's that idea of leadership development, assimilation, in other words, helping people connect relationally. You'll notice that these match up to very much what we talked about in the church health scores as well. So it's good news, your eyes are open, right, and what that looks like. Then we asked some other questions. We said, how would you describe the character of the church? Loving and caring. Just so you all know, that always makes the list. Every church we work with is loving and caring, and every church we work with is welcoming and friendly. All right, we've yet to work with a church that says we're pretty unfriendly around here, or we don't like people. Just that doesn't happen. It always makes the list. And the reason you think you're so welcoming and friendly is because people that stayed told you were. But what about the people that came that didn't stay? Well, they're going to a church down the road that's welcoming and friendly, right? Because churches are welcoming and friendly when you stay and hang out, right, and do that. So we get it. Everybody, it's welcoming and friendly. We're loving and caring. The ones that we begin to look at are the different ones, like disconnected, wandering, apathetic. There's a group of people that understand the church is in a plateau stage. That we're at this stuck place. We're not in a bad place. We're just here. And we're comfortable with that. Refreshing and hopeful, generous, accepting were other things that people mentioned as the character of the church. Then we asked the question, what would you like to change? If you could change anything, not surprising, focus on discipleship, a better blend of music, building unity, and better communication were the things that people said we'd like to change that. If we could change anything, these are the things that we'd like to change in doing that. Then we said, what are the felt needs of the community? Again, these were open-ended questions, y'all. We didn't give you any suggestions here. It was just open. You could write anything down you wanted to do. We took all that data and compiled it into the themes. It had to be 10% or higher in order to get to a theme. All right, so there's a laundry list of things that aren't on this list because one or two people said it. We're looking for themes that show up. So poverty, financial needs, broken families, senior adult needs, food pantry. Nothing really got to the place of a real trend. There were just some themes, but not a trending, which would indicate that we're probably not real clear as to what those needs are. We just think these might be it and what that looks like. Then we said, what are some of the strengths you'd like to see in your next pastor? And this will inform the search team a little bit as they begin their work next year and begin to talk about teaching and strong visionary leadership, personal, compassionate, shepherding, listening well, encourager, connecting, and discernment were some of the things you mentioned in that list of doing that. The teaching, preaching, and strong visionary leadership and personal and approachable are the three way above everything else. I mean, those are the three high priorities of things that people would like to see. Then we said, what keeps you in the church? What keeps you connected? People and relationships, family, hope for the future, Sunday school, ministry involvement, God's call and will were the things that were mentioned most often as things that keep us connected. Most places, it's people and relationships is always the number one answer for most churches because we're connected relationally to other people. All right, so you can look at all those. They're listed for you, and we got some conclusions that go with those things as well. We don't need to go through all that tonight, but you'll see that when you get the report. Then we did a first impressions. Now, this is just one weekend that when Darla was here and some of the observations, some of the things that were there. Started with the facility piece. Some of the conclusions, the building's a very nice building. It gives a good first impression to people that come onto the property. Reviewing and adding signage to help guests navigate the campus would make a guest feel more comfortable. It's a little confusing if your first time here, where you're supposed to go in, where you're supposed to park, all those kind of things. It's just adding signage to help guests, not those that are already here, right? It's for those that aren't yet here to make them more comfortable. And so there's just some of the things. There's a whole facility section in the assessment report. We don't spend a lot of time on facility tonight because we don't ever want this to be about facility. We want it to be about the church. Facility is a secondary part to that. Some low-hanging fruit, some things you can do to build momentum, but not our focus to do that. So the other thing that Darla did was talk about Sunday morning, both the Sunday morning before service, the Sunday morning service. And again, this was your first time back in the building during the assessment weekend. So there's some things there that, were just a little uncertain, if you will. But the people were welcoming and warm, as she experienced. They're very welcoming greeters inside the main doors. They were incredibly engaging with people that particular Sunday. Additional greeters at other entrances would be helpful. When people come in other doors, they're left often to their own. That Sunday, they were left to their own to find their way around. The worship service itself, music was done with excellence and energy. People were engaged and seemed to enjoy the music better than not liking it, right? So enjoyed that. The visuals on the screen were well done. Children's time had some glitches in the new sign-in system because it was the first time back for the children's ministry, not worship. Children's ministry was the first time back, so there were some sign-in issues that happened, which is kind of to be expected the first time back to do that. Children's worship itself was very engaging. Kids seemed to really enjoy what that looked like. Now, let me talk a little bit about your front door, which isn't that door. The front door is your website, your social media presence, your online presence. Because in today's culture, people Google you before they ever show up on your property. So it's important for you to know what they're experiencing and what that looks like. This is from a guest perspective and what that looks like. There is an attractive website. It's easy to navigate, quality photos, quality logos, done well, which is exciting. There is a Facebook page that has 1,705 likes with 1,780 people following the page. Posts are well done and they're informative. Man, I wish I could, whoever does that, I wish I could take them to a lot of other churches because it's not always the case. The Twitter account had 48 followers and is used mostly for youth ministry and what that looks like. The Instagram account has 321 followers. Is used regularly to share announcements and videos through Instagram. I've been doing that. Oops, sorry. And just so you know, with social media being your front page, looking at different venues and different ways to do that becomes really important. And you all know it's ever changing, right? I mean, the whole social media thing is changing constantly. Being aware of that. The fastest growing staff position right now in larger churches is a social media director. Somebody that does nothing but website, social media posts, keeping things consistent, making sure that they happen wherever it's at, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Weeme, wherever it's going to be, who knows? Who knows where that's going to take us as social media things come and go in doing that. But having somebody to pay attention to that becomes really important. So I don't know who's doing it on staff or whoever's doing it volunteering. Great job. I mean, really. We see a lot of social media presence that are terrible. So we want to, whoever that is, keep them. Whatever that looks like in doing that. Oh, 3 names. All right, good. Jordan, Justin, and Amy. If you see Jordan, Justin, or Amy, give them a big old high five. All right, tell them thank you. All right? Because that is not easy to be able to do it well. So good first impressions for people in doing that. Now, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going to get a copy of the report. All right, when you get that copy of the report, you can skip the first 22 pages, unless you're melancholy. Then you will start at page 1, because that's the only way to read anything, starting at the beginning. But page 23 will give you the summary of conclusions. I've already talked about the why. The summary of conclusions talk about the what, so you can just skip right to page 23. and look at that. Unless you're choleric. If you're choleric, you're going to skip to page 31 and just read the recommendations. All right? So whatever your personality is, you're okay. The sanguine, who knows? I mean, they'll jump all over the place at different sizes. So it's just different personalities. But if you get it, you can look at that summary conclusions or you can look at the recommendations. Now, what I want to do tonight as we move towards our closing time is to share with you just a little bit of the recommendations, kind of big picture, and then you will digest those as you have conversation. All right, so let's give you the big picture. I want to start with just some overall observations. Now, up to this point, everything we've done has been what you have said about your church. All right, up to this point, it's your report. Now we get into our interpretation. All right, we get into some of the observations that we would make. So on page 31 of the report, you'll begin to see a summary of just some observations that we have made. So let me just go through those, just because I think it's important for us all to be on the same page before we get to the recommendations. Let me give you the observations. The church has a lovely building and a congregation of loving people who overall feel quite positive about their church. That's good news. The surveys and experience meeting and worshiping with the people of the church indicated most congregants are highly committed to and love their church. Good news. Love Jesus, love each other, and love your church. The church health scores, the attendance statistics, and the life cycle placement indicate a church at a comfortable plateau with signs of decline beginning to show up. If the church is to move into a growth zone, it will require intentional effort and work, the development of a compelling vision of engaging the community for Christ. Some people see the need for change and are open to help and coaching. The key question is, will that understanding and that desire translate into a willingness to actually change? You know, I can say, oh yeah, we need to do some things more effectively, but I'm not changing anything. Right? What got you here won't get you there. It's going to require different things and change. The church indicates a desire to reach and serve the community, but there's a lack of knowledge to the actual needs of the people in the community. There are not major issues facing the church, but there are significant challenges that need to be addressed to move from comfort to missional engagement. There is a temptation for the church to settle for survival instead of thriving. It's a huge temptation. The church could be described as a cruise ship without a destination. It's comfortable, but no clear direction. The church has unlimited potential that, if tapped, can result in significant kingdom impact and seeing countless numbers of people come to Christ. But it's tapping into that resource. The transition is a great time to create a climate for change, understand the ever-changing needs of the community, come from the pandemic with renewed passion and a vision to make an even greater kingdom impact in the community. And then helping people see the why will help them to embrace the what in the next chapter of the church's history. This church has a great tradition and a great history, a great heritage that's brought us to this place. That's exciting. Man, we had to build on that. But if we simply rest on what we've always done or what we did in the past, we'll end up getting stuck and not able to engage an ever-changing culture and community around us. It'll become us and no more. And eventually us will become smaller and smaller. Requires to make a real kingdom impact. You have the incredible potential. It's just a matter of tapping into what that looks like. So there are a couple of things that we suggest during the interim time as far as recommendations go. I won't go into the detail here, but I want to give you the big picture. So these are divided into a couple different sections. The first is in leadership, and we talk about the establishing a transition team. And the transition team is all about implementing the recommendations. Okay, the transition team isn't about pastoral search. The transition team is not about governance. It's about implementing the recommendations of the assessment report. That transition team needs to be a good balance of leadership styles and personalities, spiritual gifts. That team will focus on implementing those recommendations, and it will work closely with the interim pastor to begin to work through those recommendations. So those recommendations are broken down into a couple of areas. The first is spiritual renewal. We believe with all of our hearts that prayer does not prepare us for greater works, it is the greater work. So whatever we do, wherever direction it goes, whatever needs to be addressed, has to come first from the heart of God to our hearts. So there's some things that we intentionally will do to build a climate of spiritual renewal among each of us individually, as well as the church corporately. It's prayer emphasis. It's understanding what God has to say to the church, the direction God has for the church, what his mission is that he's given to the church. But understanding that and allowing the Holy Spirit to do a new thing in us so that we can do a new thing in the community. We need to first hear from him before we make any directional changes. So we talk about spiritual renewal, and there's some things that we suggest in the area of prayer, in the area of preaching, in the area of communication as well. And then we talk about church health. Now, all the things I just talked about, we've broken them down into a couple of different categories. One is effective structures, need-oriented evangelism, holistic small groups, gift-based ministry, and loving relationships. So there's some very specific recommendations for each of those categories, not overhaul, but tweaking in each of those areas to increase the health scores, which will then increase our capacity. And so you can begin to read through those, digest those. There'll be a lot of communication about those as well. And then we talk about communication and celebration. That's the last area of recommendations. We just believe it's really important that there be no surprises, that everybody gets a chance to weigh in and to talk and to communicate. And everybody gets a chance that cares to listen and to hear the heart of the process. And so we're going to do that through a lot of different ways. We'll do that through some Zoom meetings, and we'll do that through some town hall meetings, small group meetings, whatever it's going to take to make sure everybody is engaged in the process. Tonight, presentation, in the days between now and the end of the year, it'll be conversation. So you'll have questions and answer times. You'll have a chance to dialogue as that team is put together. And starting in January, that team will begin the work of implementation in the church health areas and the spiritual renewal areas. All right, so that's kind of how it works out. But through the process, we'll communicate clearly and we'll celebrate regularly. Hey, I don't know what your attitude is, but during the interim time, we're going to party hardy. Man, we got to rejoice. We are people of hope. We're not people of despair. We're not people of fear. We're people of courage. And so we're going to celebrate. We're going to rejoice in what God has done and what God does. We're going to talk about what the team does and how the team does it, and we'll celebrate every accomplishment. Whenever a goal is accomplished, we're going to celebrate it. We're going to rejoice in what that looks like. So we're going to learn to party hardy. Now that means we're going to just give God praise for what God does. To me, sometimes it's just amazing how unemotional we are when it comes to responding to what God does. Man, when God transforms a life, transforms a heart, allows us to do some things that we didn't think were possible, we had to rejoice and celebrate in that. Yeah, some of that's my personality. You know, I like to celebrate, and I like to party, and I like to give God glory for what God has done. And you say, well, why is that? Because as I read Luke chapter 15, it tells me that when one lost sheep is found, when the coins are found, and when the prodigal son comes home, there's more rejoicing in heaven over that one than there is over the other, everything else we do in the church. See, heaven is a party place. You know, people often say, well, what do you think we're going to be doing in heaven? Party! That's what we're going to do. It says every time a lost sheep is found, all of the angels in heaven rejoice. Well, just imagine there are 3,000 to 5,000 to 10,000 people every day that come to know Jesus. Guess what heaven's doing all day? Partying. So if you don't like the party, man, heaven's probably not your destination. Because there's going to be rejoicing in heaven when the church is on the business of being the church. So here's been my whole motivation in my life. I want my life to give heaven a reason to party. I don't want my life to hinder the party. See, I hinder the party by demanding my own way. I hinder the party by not being engaged. I hinder the party by not being involved. I hinder the party by demanding that the people do a certain thing a certain way. I help the party when I actually join Jesus on the mission field. When I care like he cares about lost and broken people, which sometimes makes us really uncomfortable in what he asks us to do. But I want to help the party, not hinder the party. So one of the things we're going to do, we're going to learn to rejoice. We're going to, I know some of you, you're a little more, well, I'm too dignified to do that. I don't really clap. I don't really, get excited about much. Just it's just who I am, right? Well, we're going to learn to celebrate in whatever way you are, to rejoice in what God has done and has done, and what that begins to look like. Did y'all do baptisms here? This Sunday? Right here. Man, I want to challenge you. I don't know who's getting baptized, but whenever they get baptized, I want you to stand up and shout and holler. All right, cool. Because there's nothing we should be rejoicing more over a transformed life than to be able to just celebrate and rejoice. Well, I don't really do that. Try it. If you're the one that sits in the chair and you don't get up when everybody else gets, try it. Just try it. You'll be amazed at what you can do because you're joining heaven in what heaven is doing. You're rejoicing, and all of heaven's rejoicing with you. It's so exciting, right? So we're going to do that throughout all the things that God does during this transition period, to learn to celebrate what God is doing and has done in our lives. So there's a communication celebration section, there's a church health section, there's a leadership section, and there's a spiritual renewal section within the recommendations. Work through those. When you get the report tomorrow or when you get it on Sunday printed, look through those, take some notes, take note of what it is. Ask questions as you have opportunity in small groups to talk about those. As you have a chance to join Zoom calls or whatever it's going to be, to have the conversation so that you can begin to weigh in, so that you're aware of the why. So as you begin to introduce the what through the transition team, it makes all the sense in the world. That's our pattern. That's a process. We know that it works, and we know that even though the alarm clock may go off at 3 a.m. and you may not like it, it's worth it because you're going to move towards increased health. And in moving towards increased health, you increase your capacity to reach more and more people for Jesus. And that really becomes our focus. So, hey, church, there's some great news. Man, there's some really incredible strengths of this church. But to whom much is given, much is required. Are you done? Or do you really want to be on mission with Jesus? See, comfort says I'm going to hang out here because I like it. Mission says I'm going to go where Jesus asked me to go. And it seems like every time people in the church has gotten comfortable, God's done something to stir them up. COVID or whatever it might be. It causes us to really take a look at ourselves, which is not a bad thing. It can be an incredibly helpful thing. So, hey, thanks for letting me be with you. I'm praying for you. I pray for your interim pastor all the time, for our team. We believe that God has great things in store for the North Park Church. We can't wait to see what God does in the days that are ahead. So for all of you that have been here, those that have joined us online or wherever it might be, the future is great. The potential unlimited, but it will require work and being intentional and perhaps changing something. So embrace it. Be excited about what God's about to do through the North Park Church. Let me pray with you. Father, we thank you for this church. We thank you for the heritage, the history, countless numbers of people that have come to know Jesus as a result of the ministry of this church. We thank you, God, for leaders that have led so effectively and faithfully. As go into a leadership transition, God, we don't go in with fear. We go in with great anticipation, with excitement about where you want to take this church. I pray right now for the people of Meridian and this county and beyond. Prepare hearts that they might receive the ministry of this church in some dramatic ways. Help each of us to discern. Help each of us to join you. And help each of us to implement with courage that which you ask us to do. God, we love you today. What a privilege it is to serve your church. Bless, I pray, every person that's here. Guide and direct that the future would be great and there to be unity towards what you ask us to do. Thank you now for all that you're going to do and all that you've done, and for all that happens in the future. We'll give you the praise in Christ's name. Amen. Amen. Thank you for allowing me to be with you. I appreciate it.
Amen. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, Lonnie, very much. Just a couple things before we break. First of all, the search team, if you're here, you're going to be meeting with Lonnie for just a few minutes. I'm just going to invite you guys to go across the hall over here to the room, and he'll join you there just as soon as he possibly can. Also, I want to thank you for being here, and we are taping this, and it will be available on Vimeo and also directly from our website. Should be up tomorrow morning, so you can direct any family members or friends, people who weren't here, can go there and access it and hear this same presentation, or you can go see it again if you want to. Yeah, I'm sure. So just a couple of things for you to know. The staff will not be here tomorrow. We are going off-site for the whole day to digest and discuss what we've witnessed here tonight and what we've seen in the report. So if you come to the building or call the building, we're not going to be here. So you can call us directly, personally, if you have our emails, or we'll take those calls. We'll be available. We just won't be here. So we're going to take the whole day to meet together and pray and digest this. The governance board is meeting on Monday night for the same purpose. They're going to spend a couple hours going over this and talking about it and praying about it and so forth. And then for your information, on Sunday night, November 22nd, we're going to have what we're calling a night of conversation and prayer. We're going to invite you and all of our church family back together at 6 o'clock and answer questions, have a Q&A, talk about some things that we've observed and noted, and just give you an update on where we're going next and how we're going to get there. So that's the first night of a conversation and prayer. It's just called a night of conversation and prayer. We hope you'll come. We hope you'll spread the word. So those are the things I wanted to share with you right off the bat. Again, as your TIPS pastor, I'm delighted to be here. I hope you have begun to sense what a great ministry New Church Specialties is and how they can help churches move beyond the plateau stage. But I thank you for participating in all of that to get us to this point, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward and so forth. Lonnie's already prayed, so I'm not going to repeat that. Don't forget your kids before you leave, okay? But I'm going to dismiss you. Thank you very much.